Bottom of the sixth inning, it is now the Detroit Tigers 5, the Seattle Mariners 3. The Mariners were up 3-0 in this game, looking to move on from Detroit, as we are joined now by Farhan Lalji from TSN. Are you an admitted Seattle Mariners fan? This isn't a secret or whatever. That's your team, right?
Yeah. No, look, I've only got a limited investment level in baseball, but that investment goes to the Mariners. I'm definitely a Mariner fan out here. You get down to the game in, 2.5 hours. It's an easy trip to get to, and it's a fantastic ballpark that stood the test of time the last 30 years. And I'm dying watching this game right now. They had a chance in two different innings to blow it open, but had to settle for one run in each of those. And all of a sudden now, momentum is completely swung.
That's just these playoffs, and you can't predict that. So if you're one of the experts, I want to talk to you. We'll get to the CFL stuff.
And I can't stand the Blue Jays, just for the record. I cannot stand them.
All you got to do, Farhan, to go 3 for 3 here is just be like, and I don't like the Oilers either, and then you really have just declare they're not winning the cup this year either. I don't think they are.
Well, I won't declare that, but I'm 3 for 3. Actually, I can't say I don't like the Oilers. I just can't stand Edmonton or Oiler Twitter. I can't say I can't stand the Oilers. I just can't stand Oiler Twitter.
Yes. Assuming they're winning multiple cups in the next 3 years, why don't you get one and then we'll talk? Stop with the
for sure
parentheses S's. I saw a picture on social media, Joe Flacco in the economy section of a plane on a flight from Cleveland to Cincinnati, where notoriously the owner of the club isn't necessarily the biggest spender when it comes to his players. But word is that Joe Flacco will start for the Bengals on Sunday against Green Bay. Is this the NFL we're living in? There's just not enough quarterbacks anymore?
Well, I mean, look, we saw this a year ago with Minnesota starting a quarterback like basically 2 days into it. And Baker Mayfield has done that at various points. And we've seen this happen before, where a coach can put in the most limited package. And if you're coming over from similar systems, like if you're part of the Shanahan system and you're transferring that, there's a lot of terminology and concepts that will carry over. But look, those things aren't sustainable. Eventually, you've got to kind of dive in. But you're also counting on the experience of a 40-year-old, and they want to get this done now. They don't want to wait. And it's too bad. Jake Browning's a guy I'm pretty familiar with because he played at the University of Washington, and I follow that program pretty closely. And when he came in a couple of years ago in place of Burrow in a previous extended injury, he did great. So much so that they signed him to a pretty meaningful contract extension for a backup, and they had no problem moving forward with him as their backup, thinking that they knew what they were getting. And it's unfortunate for them, but a guy like Flacco, if Kirk Cousins eventually gets moved in the next month before the deadline, those guys are going to be expected to come in and play immediately.
You mentioned Baker Mayfield, and you saw what he did on the weekend, leading the comeback. To me, Baker Mayfield is an easy guy to cheer for because he hasn't had an easy road. He's been on multiple teams. Is it nice to see him having some success in Tampa Bay, and he's doing it the Baker way?
Yeah, I think so. And he and Sam Darnold both in that game had a very similar story. They were high picks. They were in the same draft. They got moved on, and they finally found consistent success on their fourth team, and they were teammates for a while together in Carolina. And it just goes to show you, right, that it takes time. This is a complicated position. It's a demanding sport. There's more pressure on this than anything else. I mean, the most high-pressured position in all of sport. Sorry, hockey fans who think it's goalie. It's not. Whoa. It's a quarterback in the NFL. So, you get better at this the longer you go. And there are some guys who won't get that second opportunity because they come in with just not enough of a body of experience at the collegiate level, right? And you don't get those experiences back. So a guy like, Anthony Richardson probably doesn't get that second opportunity. Zach Wilson probably doesn't get that. You look at a guy like, I mentioned Richardson, but Trey Lance, a guy that just left so much collegiate experience on the table. You might not get those opportunities, but the guys that do still need more time. And when they get their second chance, they generally make the most of it. And both Mayfield and Darnold have. And I think in Mayfield's case, that you can put him in the conversation for MVP right now.
Monday Night Football was Kansas City Chiefs and the Jacksonville Jaguars, and we don't get to see it. Not a lot of people get a chance to see Jacksonville Jaguar games, just because for the longest time they shouldn't have been on TV. After what I saw on Monday night, that looks like a fun football team, young, aggressive. got some guys that can play, which we've never heard of because we never see them on TV. I forgot that Trevor Lawrence can be good at football. And what's happening with Kansas City?
Yeah, look, if you look at Kansas City, to me, their season has come down to two plays, both very similar plays, interceptions at the goal line, right? That Patrick Mahomes threw in Philadelphia and then again in this game. So, we can look at the craziness of that last play involving Trevor Lawrence. And, I'm curious to see what Lawrence becomes because we're all still trying to find out. And to my previous point about Darnold and Mayfield and how it took them some time, it's good for Lawrence that he's been afforded a level of time. Now, he still plays an inconsistent brand of football, which was not what he did in college. Like, I was so bullish on Trevor Lawrence when he came out. I mean, he was pedigreed and ready in the way that guys like Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning were, right? Like, that was the expectation. And he hasn't hit yet, but I still think there's talent there. And even on that final drive, right? Like, he makes an electric throw up the sideline against cover two in the hole, to move the ball down the field 30 yards and then kind of make some weird plays. And, so there's still an up and down to his game that I never expected. As for Mahomes, I'm still betting on him, right? Like, Mahomes is really good at football. And, at the end of the day, they're, like I said, they're 2 plays away from being 5-1. Instead, they're 2-3. So I still believe this team is good enough. They're only going to get better when Rashee Rice gets back in the lineup. And, they've got some injured guys on defense. I think they're going to get better. I can't believe that an Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones team, and Chris Jones looked bad on that final play, is ever going to miss the playoffs.
Week 6 kicks off tomorrow night. Philadelphia is in New York to take on the Giants. I think 99.9% of the modern world with an internet connection and a little common sense are probably going to take the Eagles all over that. Last week, those BC Lions, and you were on the show and you were talking about this offense and their building going, they beat the Calgary Stampeders 38-24. I want to talk about BC, but let's start with Calgary. It seems like the wheels are really starting to come off. The big play VA stuff that was working earlier in the season just isn't there anymore. And now it's to the point of, are we really worried? Do you think that the Stamps may not win another game this year?
I wouldn't say that. And look, the fourth quarter was a lot to build on. And I think there are some big plays in that offense. They had 3 big shots in that game, including early against, the Damian Alford play. I just don't know that it's enough right now because when you look at their defense, I thought their defense did some good things against Nathan Rourke. They sacked him 3 times in the first half. But ultimately, they still wound up giving up a lot of big plays. Now, look, BC's offense is good and Nathan is good, and he's going to do that against everybody. But, both sides of the ball are showing signs of life, but it's not enough because they were so explosive offensively earlier, but really their defense was incredible in the first half of the season, and they're just not playing at that level. So I thought Jalen Hutchings got better. Hicks got better. They were able to get some pressure, but it just wasn't enough to expose or to mask some of the holes in the back end. There were still some tackling issues. So, but I just don't think all is lost there. I think I've seen enough in 2 games to make me think they're going to win again. Now, are they a contender? I don't think so. But I'm not writing them off to finish on the western side of the playoff bracket or to potentially even win a playoff game. Like, I don't think they're a Series Grey Cup contender, but I don't think they're as awful as 0-4 in the last month makes it out to be.
We had Andrew Harris on the show on Monday, and I asked him about Buck Pierce, and he said Buck Pierce is great at finding out what you do well and then exploiting that and finding out what you don't do well and staying away from that. It seems like he's finding out. He found out whatever. Matthew Betts, you can't stop him now. What's with the switch that got flipped? Because he has been past 6, 7, 8 weeks. He's been the best defender in the CFL. I don't think there's anybody better.
Yeah, and that's less Buck Pierce than it is Mike Benavides, right? Because he's kind of done some things to unlock him. And I think you got to give Ryan Rigmaiden, their GM, a lot of credit as well, because they added 2 guys on the defensive side of the ball on the defensive line in Levi Bell and Bradley Anai, and those guys have become difference makers. And so collectively, their entire defensive line is playing better. Now, look, Matthew Betts has been fantastic, 10 sacks in 4 games. You just can't deny his level of dominance. But it's Jonah Tavai on the inside. It's the other 2 players I mentioned on the edges, and it's allowing players in the secondary to be a little more comfortable, right? And not maybe get exposed as well. So, we'll see what it looks like going forward here, right? They're playing Edmonton next week. We'll see what happens with Edmonton this week against Winnipeg. If Edmonton beats Winnipeg, you've now got an Edmonton team that thinks they got a shot at the playoffs coming to BC, and a BC team that would then be in control of their own destiny for a home playoff game. So there'll be a lot of stakes in that game. But, in terms of, you mentioned the Buck Pierce effect, I think offensively, he and Nathan Rourke are so on the same page right now. He understands what his guys do well. And if you watch, I don't know if I mentioned this to you on the show last week, but if you watch the Lions in practice and see the number of heavy personnel packages they've got and a big back in the backfield to go along with James Butler, it's a group that really, really looks like it's preparing for prairie weather in the playoffs. And then they're going to get the two offensive tackles back next week in Broxton and Allen, and that's just going to make them exponentially better and allow them to play more physically as well.
I mentioned the fact that there's Horvath just bulldozing his way down the field. I'd mentioned the fact that Farhan said that they're planted for cold weather football in Saskatchewan. No, they're not. Now, you've been very honest about the Saskatchewan Roughriders at times this season, and I know that listeners don't like it, but it has been the truth. We beat Ottawa 2013. A lot of us wanted a blowout, but it didn't happen. Our offense we're not operating with that ease that we did earlier in the season. We only scored 14 of the 20 because the other 6 came on defense. The kicking game wasn't there. It was just, we won, but now in Saskatchewan, you're seeing you got an American kicker in camp now. Injuries, so that secondary, more strange guys that have never met each other before are going to be starting Friday night. And luckily, the Argos are coming to town without a Nick Arbuckle, probably, who got hurt in that game. Did you see a game that wasn't very fluid against the Red Blacks as well last Friday night?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. And they still are a little herky-jerky offensively right now. And, you look at Trevor Harrison, when you see the final stat line at the end of the game, and he's over 340 yards and a really high completion percentage, and you just expect more of a bottom-line production. So, whether it's red zone, whether it's penalties, there are things there that are kind of making them work a little harder than they need to. And we talked about this last week that, they're reintroducing all these players back into the lineup. And I think it's going to help them because if you want to start an American kicker at some point, you're going to have to figure out the ratio elsewhere. And then you don't have Devon Campbell as well, who's not going to play this week. So it puts some pressure on the offensive side of the ball to have a bunch of these Canadian receivers in the game who can all play. But, they were doing so well with Myers and Johnson, earlier in the year. And so, I do think it's taking a while for them to just get a little more fluid. And I believe in Trevor Harris a lot and Mark Mueller as well. So I think they're going to figure it out. But I just think it's taking some time. And like I said, if they decide to go with an American kicker, it's only going to get more complicated ratio-wise. And then on the other side, just so you know, Arbuckle and Wynton McManus are both being shut down for the season in Toronto. So, they're going to play some guys that you saw it easier against Ottawa last week. It's not going to be easier against Toronto as well.
Well, for a lot of us Rider fans, we're hoping that Toronto come to town will cure our ills for whatever they are. Outside of the Toronto-Saskatchewan game, you've got Calgary at Hamilton, you've got Winnipeg at Edmonton, you've got Ottawa at Montreal. What's the most intriguing game on the schedule for you this weekend?
I mentioned before the Winnipeg-Edmonton game, right? And I want to know if what we saw from Winnipeg last week is a one-off. And look, I understand that part of their problems offensively were not having Zach Collaros in the lineup, and you can't function offensively with Chris Streveler there for long term. You're gonna have to find miraculous ways to win games, which they did at times. But they looked so good, and the timing with Zach looked so instant, way better than it's looked at any point when Zach has played earlier in the year. So, is that all of a sudden, the bear awakening, and now we're going to be stuck with Winnipeg again in a Grey Cup game? We'll see. But so that's my concern. And with Edmonton, you look at how well they've been playing of late, and this is it, right? Ottawa and Toronto are out. Edmonton's still in the mix, and if they can win some of these games, the schedule sets up for them in terms of being able to play Winnipeg and in terms of being able to play Calgary, and BC. Now BC's clinched a playoff spot, but the other two haven't yet, so they can still make life difficult for these teams. So they're going to be an awfully motivated bunch. So that game intrigues me more than any.
Calgary does go to Hamilton, and you'd mentioned they did play a little better in that fourth quarter against the Lions. I don't know if a moral victory this week is going to be enough. Calgary has to find a way somehow on the road to beat the Ticats. Is it as simple as they just have to stick with Dietrich Mills and not get away from that run game through all four quarters and just try and get back to Stampeder football?
Yeah, I mean, look, what was Stampeder football, right? Like, everything is easier when you play with a lead. And if your defense is generating a lot of turnovers and putting you in position and you're hitting explosive plays, then that's going to work out for you. But if you don't have that, and all of a sudden you fall behind, because Bo Levi Mitchell and Hamilton, they've got the ability to create explosive plays as well. So it's not as easy as that. Should they commit more to the run game early on? Absolutely, they should. But if all of a sudden Bo dials up a couple of big ones, and teams know that going in, right? Like, when you see certain offenses and certain defenses, you've got to do a little bit more, play it a certain way, right? And when teams play the Lions, coaches are going to get more aggressive offensively because they know they can't settle for threes. They know, they're going to do some things because they're going to need offense. And when you play Calgary, it's the same thing. You need to play with a lead so that they can't lean on the run game. And then, do you load up against the run early and see if they can take some shots? So there's, I'm be interested to see how Brett Monson plays that defensively for Hamilton, their defensive coordinator, in that game. But, we'll see if VA can dial up some deep ones early on in that game and play with the lead so that Mills can be more involved.
Bad news. It is now Detroit 8, Seattle 3, bottom of the seventh inning.
Oh, I'm hearing the cheering on the TV over there, so I'm dying here.
We'll wrap on this. Are the Vancouver Canucks a playoff team this year, in your opinion?
So I'm going to say yes. But I'm not saying that with a high degree of confidence. I think they're going to finish with 97 or 98 points, and I think they're going to get in as a wild card team. I don't believe they're going to finish in the top of their division. Thatcher Demko, if Thatcher Demko stays healthy, will always keep them in the playoff conversation. And if Elias Pettersson can get, he's not going to be a 100-point player again, but if he can get to the mid-80s and be a point-a-game guy again, I think that'll be, enough for them to add some things offensively. So, a lot of ifs around the Canucks right now. They need this to happen. They need that to happen. They need health here. They need scoring here. But I think they're going to find a way to squeak in.
Take that, Oiler fans. And then when they knock you out in the first round, boy, is that going to be sweet. And Farhan called it way back in early October. All right.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all.
Okay.
If you're going to save the Chiefs, you can't save that one.